Wilma Combs. Mayor, yes.
This is
We've got a couple of guests from the media here.
Yep, I saw your truck outside.
Yeah. And then we've got, the independent record guys will be joining us, so probably logged in at some point. So,
Fantastic.
And-
Okay.
And when we have a Helena Citizens Council representative
Fantastic.
virtually.
great.
Mr.
This is
Thomas.
Nolan Lister, he's the representative from that independent record. Mike Thomas.
Pleasure. Media tonight. I'll stare right at the camera. I'm really excited.
So we do have about a half hour from this point. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the Helena Citizens Council.
Okay,
Fantastic. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
yeah, I'll ask the first question here. Meaningful community engagement and access to city staff are important to a well-informed and well-functioning city. In Helena, we have the Helena Citizens Council established by city charter, which is composed of 28 elected representatives from 7 neighborhoods. The HCC makes recommendations to the city commission on budget and future development of the city. In addition, the city has several advisory boards, parks, open lands, water quality, conservation, public art, etc., to provide community input and make recommendations to the city commission. So we have a 3-part question here. And the first part is, what approaches or systems of meaningful and effective community engagement have you initiated, supported, or been involved with?
Good question. And I'm assuming that's based off of my experience in my current city. So what I have done in Amity is that I've expanded community outreach through social media, as well as being a active member in the community. Basically anything the city does, I'm usually present somewhere in the background or actively engaged. And then I've also improved our transparency by posting more information and just trying to have people answer questions. My community is small enough that it's very easy for somebody to walk into City Hall, any community member, any resident to walk into City Hall and just say, I want to talk to Mike, and I'll just walk out of my office and usually come and say hi. And so that's been very helpful with community engagement. But on a mass distribution process, working with my mayor and my council, we've I'll back up a little bit. When I was hired in 2019, we had a very bad issue with transparency. Everyone just thought we were a big an enigma in a box, and their utility bill went in there, and then something happened, and maybe the water came on. So it was my job to basically explain what we were doing with their taxpayers' money and what our responses were and why we were doing it. So I spent a lot of time with the then mayor and the council, starting out like improving our social media output and then answering questions and then being responsive to things and then sharing more information. And over time, that's also increased to an Instagram page, which the city council and the mayor requested. We now also have we post all of our meetings on YouTube. So we have a little owl device as well. And we post all of our city council meeting, planning commission meetings on YouTube, so the community can see them if they can't make it in person. And then we've updated and revised the newsletter a little bit, putting more information that's relevant to the community in there. And then, as I mentioned, I'm usually present in a lot of activities around town. So I think between all there, we have seen consistently in our annual city surveys that the quality of engagement and the overall satisfaction of the community have gone up by not significant percentages, but enough percentages that we've shown progress, and people, their disdain for the community decreasing, or when I say community, for the city hall, just decreasing, positivity in the community increasing, and people becoming more and more appreciative of the money I send in every month and bills and stuff and fees, that it actually is coming back to me in some fashion, and they're telling me how. So coming to Helena, I would like to be able to do many of those same things. I know you talk about a lot of our established, is just ensuring that they're continuing to run, and that when that engagement continues, and then slowly improve.
Mhm.
So I think that was part one. correct?
Yes, that was part 1. How would you manage access with the city staff for the Helena Citizens Council members and for citizens?
Well, that's an interesting question, since I don't quite know how you set it up currently. So I have no basis for comparison. So what I answer with may be way off of what you would like. But that said, I'd like to see that the city manager is always accessible to the citizen council in some way, shape, or form, phone call, email, personal meetings to some extent, being able to be that focal point and for people to come back, the commissioners, as well as the ACC to come and talk to me and work with me to help progress the city. And then where I may depart from what the current process is going forward is to ensure that maybe there's a little bit more structure potentially to how folks approach city staff. So working with that, there's established, if there isn't one already, an established process that maybe the ACC or community members come to me first, and then I work that with the relevant department, whether it's Parks and Recs or Public Works or whatever, and then bring that back, and then maybe we set up a meeting or something, or bring it to one of the committees or boards that you mentioned, the Parks Committee or the Water Committee, and then have that as a topic of discussion onto the agenda. Where I've seen, at least in Oregon, in my short tenure, but talking to very experienced city managers that I neighbor with, where things usually go off the rails is when the not too much access, but when there's too many competing ideas and then nothing gets prioritized because no one knows exactly what the number one priority is or what they should be focusing on, because as they start one task, somebody comes in and says, no, this is what I want to do, or I figure it out, and usually there's a paralysis of action. My city, Amity, is small enough that there's only 8 or 9 of us in City Hall and working, if you count our part-time guys and volunteers, that I can usually personally manage the chaos. In a larger city like this, I would want to work with my department heads and with the ACC to kind of build up a process that there's none already established to make that more streamlined and not limit the access points, but at least limit the flow of information, so it's all coming in the right process. So the staff and the employees of the city are all kind of working in the same general direction. I can hold off on multiple tasks. If those processes are already in place, then I would definitely want to just continue with those and improve them over time. So if you already got them, great, I'll make them better. If you don't have them, I'd like to install those and get those working. But it should never be at the decision of you can't access this, or you can't get this information, or you can't have this data, or you can't see this person. It's more just trying to make all this. I'm from Oregon, so make all the salmon swim in the same direction.
Good. And the third part of this question is, how would you work with the city commission to respond to and, as appropriate, implement citizens council and advisory board recommendations?
All of those should be the staff inputs, my inputs, the mayor and commission's input, and then the ACC's input should all be brought to the table in the appropriate forms and discussed. And then the ACC inputs go to the commission, and the commission, basically, the way I see it, decides. And then as a manager and the staff, we execute on those decisions. I see my job as a city manager as executing policy and ideas, advising the ACC and the mayor and the commission with good ideas and maybe better ways to do things. But at the end of the day, my job, for instance, purposely to go back to my military training, is to sleep smartly and carry out orders. I should not be establishing those policies, or at least coming up with a lot of those ideas. That should be all for you. But to do those, and actually, like I said, getting the salmon to swim in the right direction, that those should be done in the proper forms, and then with the proper meeting, the state and federal meeting laws being met, and then the proper opportunities where people have the chance to see the meetings and be heard. And then those decisions, the best ones being pushed forward and voted upon by the mayor and the commissioners, and then in return, them being directed down to city staff to execute. I would like to say that as the city manager, with staff's input and staff support and staff knowledge and expertise, that I would provide myself as a good advisor and an expert resident with that support to provide good counsel and input and information to all of you, so you can make the best informed decision possible and potentially know what the causes and effects would be of certain decisions. But it should be basically a team decision made in a public forum, with the best idea being voted on the moving forward.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. So the second question. As with most attractive towns in the Intermountain West, Helena faces critical challenges in housing affordability and availability. What is your experience in fostering city-supported affordable housing development, annexations of adjacent areas in the county, and the creation and implementation of measures related to encouraging infill development?
Yes, all the city planning problems that every community has. Luckily, you're not restricted like Oregon is with the urban growth boundaries, which provide a whole different set of land use laws that are peculiar to Oregon. So, but in that sense, we can't just annex land. We have to do a lot of procedural stuff to prove that the land we're grabbing has a purpose and a use for. But that translates to here, and with your question, is that the land we should be annexing in should be in the best interest of the city, not the developer. And I don't mean this to slam or denigrate any developers out there, but it should be in the best interest of the city to meet our needs going forward based off of our transportation plans, our development plans, our zoning, our code, to ensure that the development that goes in and the land we annex in, or the new housing development we build in, gets basically the most impact for the city and is done in a smart way. So it would be a lot of input from the HCC. There should be the developer's voice there as well. But again, with the mayor and the commission, it should be a decision of, okay, this, yes, your development is nice, but it's, you know, we don't need housing development of 60 McMansions or something that are not going to be affordable. Maybe we work together so that if we annex in your land, there's an agreement that you will provide 20% of those houses or something that are at an affordable rate or at below market rate, and you have to negotiate with the council and commission's input as to how that has worked. Additionally, before you annex in land and you build new developments, you should always be looking at whether the infrastructure can support it. Can the roads, the streets, and the sewer systems all manage to integrate all that information or all that new growth? So that should also be a very strong input from my position as your future city manager, along with all the expertise in public works. And I met your public works team this morning, some of them, and they're fantastic individuals. So getting their inputs and their expertise to provide a good counsel and advice to all of you to say, this is a great development, we need to do this. And we also need to ensure that there's enough piping or sewage and treatment at this facility over by the airport that can handle this going forward. Or before we put this in, we actually need to build this first, this capacity, making sure that all that is managed and appropriately handled. So, and I'm sure there's processes in place for those. It's just making sure that they're followed appropriately and that everyone gets a vote and a decision. At the same time, there needs to be a desired end state and a desired process to get these things done. So you're not just doing paralysis by analysis or constant debate. There should be, we will make concrete decisions in the best interest of the community. Some of you unfortunately may lose, some of you may win, but hopefully we can all come to an agreement that everyone will accept so that we can move forward with this development. One of the things I've seen in Oregon, at least with the housing issue, and I'll get to infill in 1 second, is that you always have this fight between density and sprawl and trying to balance between the two of those. And oftentimes people don't like the density, but the infrastructure can't handle the sprawl. So it's trying to find that basis. So one thing you can do with the infill is look at your zoning codes, look at your developmental codes, and maybe work in a sense that you allow for what we call them. There's different names for them, but we would call them auxiliary dwelling units. I've heard ADUs, mother-in-law units, accessory dwelling units. I've heard them all different names, but that's basically ADUs. So you maybe rezone a section to allow for that infill where people can put in on the same water meter, the same sewer feed, they can put in a second, a smaller studio apartment or something that could accommodate more affordable housing. Or you work to say, just driving around on the windshield tour this morning, there's a lot of places where like, this is going to be a huge new development on all this pristine land out here. And then you drive by and there's 4 or 5 empty lots. And it's like, well, you could maybe do something with that by rezoning where that lot or that parcel of land that's already encompassed, maybe smartly developed into a mixed use residence, which you have apartments on top, maybe a certain amount that are lower income or workforce housing, some market rate, and you have a commercial building underneath it. So things like that can all be worked on. So I see those, all of those together. It's not just one thing. All those together will help slowly over time reduce your housing issues in Helena.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Is that right? Okay. So one thing that came out when Helena updated its growth policy in 2019 was, how can the city be better at saying yes in terms of encouraging infill development? Do you have any specific examples of how that might happen?
So not knowing particulars, and I admit I'm going to have to learn very quickly, and I will, your tax property requirements and laws like that, and how you gain revenue off of property. What I've seen in the city of Eugene, Oregon, where I was an intern, I worked on a project called the multi-unit property tax exemption project. And basically what they required is if you did an infill development and included a certain percentage of low income workforce housing in that development, the city would defer property taxes for a set period of time. And they worked with the developer and there is a city council. So the city council, the staff and the developers would work out a process to a policy which basically would defer taxes, the property taxes for X number of years in order for the project to pencil out for the developer. And that actually did bring in some infill development into the downtown area of Eugene, Oregon. So that's something that could be looked at here. That's why I said I would need to look at your property tax laws and obviously with the commission and the mayor's approval and whatever the state laws are, kind of figure out what we can do. But that's a way to potentially fix it. It was a way that Eugene kind of addressed it, was through these tax exemptions that allowed for the initial development, and then over time the revenue would come back at a later date.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Very helpful. Okay, on to the third question, if you can hear me all right.
Are you just fine?
Great. Similar to many cities throughout the country, the city of Helena has budget constraints that limit the city's ability to implement long-needed infrastructure upgrades and community development goals. Please describe your experience in developing creative fee assessments that will produce reliable revenue streams and your experience in leveraging grant dollars that will augment such revenue streams.
The one that comes to mind off the top of my head, City of Amity took about $270,000 worth of ARPA money. So that was, I think you all received that as well. So free money from the federal government that we then used to replace all the water meters in town. So we had water meters that were up to 50, 60 years old that were analog. They were falling apart. They were misreading flow through the meter. So the city had a high lost water rate, and for infrastructure improvements, that lost water rate translated to lost revenue, which meant we had to have a higher loan and interest rate on any future project that we came through or that we were trying to push through. By replacing all these water meters with ARPA money, and to answer your question a different way, we could potentially use grant money if it's available. But non-loan money, we were able to replace all these water meters with new Wi-Fi digital red meters. And these new meters initially eliminated an $8,000 a year meter reading contract we had with a private entity. So that we brought that back in-house and got ourselves that money back. And then the meters themselves, because they were more accurate and newer after they were replaced, they started reading a more accurate water read through the city. So although we had raised our water rates at one, and we did a water rate study, we realized that now we were finding all this water. We actually were increasing our revenues. There was a little bit of concern and consternation with the community. So like, my water rates are going up, but we basically don't, it's not your water rates have gone up. We're now actually just charging you for the water that you've always had go through. Now the meters are here. So the council and our Oregon Association of Water Utilities worked a plan where we started giving a base, in our base rate, we gave an allotment of water. So 2,000 gallons of water was put into the kind of offset that people going, hey, my water's bill's gone up. But we were over that year and a half now, almost 2 years that we've had this in place with these new meters, we've seen an increase in our revenue because now we're actually capturing all the water that's going through these meters. So that's one way to do it is to replace aging infrastructure using potentially grant or loan money or fees and services or SDCs. I think they're not called FDCs here, but some developmental charges that could then be used to improve the infrastructure elsewhere that would then improve the quality of revenue coming into the city. One thing I know most people do not like, but it worked for Amity, and and a lot of cities are doing this is I should say cities in Oregon. They're rewriting the code, or rewriting their ordinances, and after rate studies that basically and implement an automatic rate increase on a periodic basis, whether it's every year, every 3 years, every 5 years, or whatever, of a certain percentage tied to a consumer price index that automatically increases the water rates. I don't know how I've been told in the windshield tour I did today that there's some specifics and details in Montana with the way the state legislature tells cities how they can run these processes and do their taxing. But that's maybe limited, but that may be something as staff, I would have to go to commission and the mayor to basically say over time, when we do another rate study, we may need to build this in. And that ensures that your revenues are at least increasing over time to match the potential increases in cost of maintenance. I know that's not an answer people like to hear, but that is a fundamental way to ensure that your revenues over time do continue to keep up. The other ingenious way of doing revenue streams is public-private partnerships, kind of like the multi-use property tax exemption, where I mentioned before. That brings in new businesses, that brings in new growth, that brings in new property tax revenue at a delayed date. But if you do it right, that revenue does over, and that was part of what the work I had to do. That revenue, even though it's delayed, if it's done correctly, will actually more or less eliminate the losses of that first few years where they weren't paying any property tax, and you basically gain it back over time. So that's another thing that you can do in the future. So those are all different ways to improving revenue streams and to help with your infrastructure, to help with general funds. I know people don't like fees and new or higher taxes, but those are ways to kind of work around them. But at the end of the day, sometimes the best thing to do is just educate the population and work with them and be transparent about it. I was like, if you want this desired end state, you will have to pay something here up front, and that payment will directly go to this project. And then through that process, we have, over the course of time, you have to show we made this milestone, we've made this marker, we've done this event, and we're getting to that process. So here's where your money's going. On a very limited basis, we've done that in Amity and with our water infrastructure project to show why the rate increases we've established in this whole process I just talked about, why that was necessary to build this water infrastructure facility that we're under construction with right now. So the amount of complaints I've heard from the community over when I first showed up in 2019 to now has dropped off a cliff. There are still people that complain about the water bills, but because we've been doing that constant education and explanation and sharing of our information, that amount has decreased. So I think that's one way to win over, for lack of a word, win over some of the community members to why those costs are necessary. Hopefully that answered your question there on the owl. Out there in Zoom lane.
Yeah, no, that was great. I guess just one follow-up there would just be, what grant writing experience you have and how important, what's your view of the grant process and how important it is to supplement those permanent revenue streams?
Grants are hugely important to communities. I have done a lot of grant writing. My results have been mixed. I will freely admit that. I've written some winners, and I've also written a lot of just thanks. You were our second tier or our runner up. You didn't get the money, but you keep writing them. You keep learning. You keep better. In my city, I'm basically the grant writer. I would probably still be a grant writer in Helena, but I would hopefully have other folks that are either full-time grant writers or the expertise in each of those departments to help me tell our story in the best way possible to obtain that grant. And I like grants. I think they're a great opportunity. The one issue I have with them, at least for a small rural community like mine, maybe not so of a problem here in Helena, but possibly still, is a lot of these grants have matching requirements that just cannot be met because of whatever the metrics they're using. So it's ensuring that the city properly plans for that potential match in either the budget or some other way to ensure that they have the match to go forward for the big grant that they need. And sometimes that education process I mentioned previously is just explaining to people why this money is not being used for potholes or for whatever, it's because we're actually setting this money aside to meet the match for this grant at a later date. So this money will be used later to get this bigger goal. And that's the education you have to tell to the community, but then you also have to sell that story to the people that are the grant funders. So, but every community has to fight for every last dime they can possibly get from grant funding, because that in many aspects is some of the only ways you can fund some projects these days.
Excellent, thank you.
Well, the city of Helena has multiple resolutions centered on citywide sustainability, neighborhood livability, and climate action goals, including a resolution for 100% clean renewable electricity for the Helena community by 2030. This is resolution 2592. And the resolution on climate action with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions level of the city and increase climate resilience of the public works system. Resolution 19530 and 2347. And the waste reduction resolution, which is resolution 2643. So in your role as city manager, how will you advance and prioritize the implementation of the city's resolutions and other sustainability efforts?
Also very good question. Very good question, though, for them as I was walking the door. The big one, getting to 0% carbon or carbon neutral power by 2030 is a noble goal, and it can be reached, but it needs to be done in partnership with your power provider. As I was doing the windshield tour today, I asked about like, who is your power provider? Is it a local? Since we're kind of remote here significantly, but kind of remote, is there, do we do our own power generation, or are we on somebody else's grid? We're on somebody else's grid. So first thing about going to carbon neutral is if the city is making sure that the power provider is on board with going to carbon neutral and green energy or wind energy in the future. So that's going to be a partnership that between the city administrator and the mayor. I'm sorry, city manager, so I used to call myself an administrator, but the city manager position, the mayor, working with that entity to say, hey, this is what we'd like to see, and ensure that the electricity coming into the city from the outside is clean at the end of the day. Where the city can do its own work is that fleet vehicle maintenance. I know Ford is having some issues with the production line, but in a year or two, and the next few years, they'll ramp up their fleet of pickup trucks that are electric, pickup the F-150s or whatever. Troy drove me over here today in a gas powered pickup truck. So maybe one of the ways to reach that goal is as each vehicle gets replaced, it gets replaced with, there's a requirement policy in place that each one of these has to be replaced by an electric vehicle. So one pickup out, one pickup in, but it's an electric, and then you slowly put that in there. There will also probably need to be, as part of the infill development, and it's all interconnected, is that maybe there's tax credits or assistance for development that puts in the necessary charging stations. So the charging stations are there for the vehicles to become more green. Where the city does a public-private partnership with the power company to put in electric charging stations. Driving around here, walking around here for the last 24 hours-ish, I don't see a lot of charging stations. I see some electric vehicles, but not a lot, but that's something you could do to encourage both that in the fleet of vehicles that you have, as well as with the community at large, to encourage them to show that you're leading by example. Hey, we're doing this, you can do this too. And hey, we're going to help you by putting out these charging stations. You might get laughed at a little bit, but over time, as more fleets become and more cars do become electric, having that infrastructure built would be phenomenal. And then that also gets to the infrastructure to meet some of these needs. You're not going to be able to overhaul your infrastructure overnight. So the best that you can hope for is that every improvement you make to your infrastructure slowly but surely makes it more green and efficient. Your public works team told me that you are likely looking at a large in the next 5 to 10 years of a sewer treatment plant improvement the parameters of that plant could include, when you expand it, or that treatment facility could include a certain percentage of recycled material or green requirements for solar power. I saw there was solar panel power out there, so maybe you double the number of those or something. So you're gonna have to do those in concert with everything else to not break the bank, but that's gonna be very important. So, but having that plan of as we improve our infrastructure, we're gonna make every one of these more green, will get us to those extents. These are high and mighty goals, and they're achievable. It just has to be done in a rational and very methodical process. I met Troy today, your facilities manager. So one of the other things that could be done in conjunction with the council and the commission, I should say, and the mayor, is that every time we do a building renovation, we put in higher grade insulation, as well as double pane windows, or we slowly take out water heaters and put in electric heat pumps or something to that effect. And I don't know all the particulars, maybe already it's been accomplished, and great, we're well on the way. But maybe instead of electric ranges or something, I know the city of Eugene also just they eliminated a new construction gas stoves, gas appliances. I'm not trying to make it political, but that's something you could slowly just say as we replace each one of these stoves, like here in the golf course. So if it needs maintenance, we just replace it with now the new ones are the induction cooktops or whatever. So you just replace it that way, and slowly but surely you're making all those improvements, but you're not doing it in a manner that either breaks the bank or does it in such a way that it causes chaos in the community, because they're like, oh yeah, what are you doing? Why is my money being spent on this project when we really need this project done? So, and then it goes back to your very first question about it's just a constant education and outreach between the HCC, the commission, and the mayor, and the community at large is going, this is why we're doing it. This is the need. We have these resolutions in the book. We're trying to meet those goals. Here's how we're chipping away at that project. So those would be the ways I would get to that process. The big one is going to be getting the power commission that brings in the high tension wires, getting that into the city, helping them go green, because you're kind of defeating the purpose if you go green here, but the power you bring in is coming from a coal plant 20 miles away. You're still there. So, and it may have to be that way for a while. You can at least ensure that your system is good as it is, and then work with the long range with the mayor to ensure that the rest of it goes that way. You could give credits to developments that include solar power and as part of the infill or the construction and redevelopments, that may pass a resolution or a policy or an ordinance that updates the code that there's 30% of the facility needs to be solar powered, or there needs to be a bioswale as part of your sewage system, or address stormwater runoff to ensure that meets the so we're not putting as much tax on our sewer system. So there's hundreds of little ways to do that, and those would be the things that working with staff and the guidance of the commission, the mayor, and all of you to get those done.
Some good ideas.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Well, we're about out of time. I just wanted to give our HCC members, if you had any follow-up questions or comments before we wrap up.
All liquids are down here.
Was I trying to steal your distract? Sorry, please.
No, very much.
I saw that you you interned for a short while at Sustainable Cities Initiative for Institute.
Yes.
I was just curious what projects you worked on while you were there and your experience there.
So the university, so for those of you not familiar, the University of Oregon has the Sustainable Cities Initiative, and they also have the Sustainable Cities Year program that they do within the state of Oregon. It's run out of the College of Arts and Design with the University of Oregon's 3 p.m. program. And my internship there was for academic credit. So we had basically one semester, one term to run that process. My actual project, sorry, Mr. Mayor, pleasure to you. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Apologize for interrupting you. I don't know if anyone saw it, but the mayor departed, so I just want to say goodbye.
No worries.
So my actual project went into and that was my internship was to develop a feedback survey. They had a really good program in place, but they had no way to determine whether a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road, whether they were still meeting their goals or the initial intent. So I designed the feedback. So that's what I was doing for my 10-week internship.
Great.
SCI in particular, some of the projects they were running that they wanted this feedback in is that I believe it was LaPrine, Oregon, they put in a new community center, city hall, police station, and they wanted to see if the people were using it to the level that they were expecting. The other projects they did is they did bike trails, walking paths, and other alternative transportation methods through, I believe it was Bend or maybe Redmond, Oregon, where they were trying to improve the accessibility of folks getting around town through other means and to be more healthy by using bikes, et cetera. So those are the sort of projects that they worked on and that Sustainable Cities undertook for communities all around throughout the state of Oregon.
Excellent. Thank you.
You know, a related question, something that Helena has struggled with as a,
They're leaving, they're not even done.
Just so everybody knows, we've got another interview at 3. So what I want to do is I'll allow you to continue the conversation. I apologize. I've got to leave as well. And that's the reason Commissioner Collins had to leave.
It's enough, Rob. You're in Vegas.
No, we gotta be up in the commission, city county building in about 15 minutes. So allow you to wrap up. I just want to thank all our Helena Citizens Council members. Mike, I want to thank you.
Thank you. I've had a great
And
time.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, everyone. Nice
Thanks,
to-
Jim.
Yep.
I will sit here for a few more minutes if you
what, if it's a,
or not, or if you have to.
Lowell, I'm gonna have to cut you off though, unfortunately, as the online participant.
All right.
So-
I've got to go too. Mr. Thomas.
well, what I wanted to